Previously on Starseed Psyche, Kyo Adachi was transported into the base of an alien race called the Repsauros, who have been living on Earth in secret for thousands of years. He appeared there with fellow Super-8 soldier and fellow Starseed, Toshiko Yamada, along with Phaestriel, a Kyusidian trying to help discover who created the Kyuserax drones attacking humanity, and Chip Akali, Kyo's closest friend, who it turns out is a Repsauro, who erased his memories before being turned into a human to live out a new life. The first people they came across in this base were Tarbus, a Repsauro with many mechanical limbs and augmentations, and Dr. Anastasia Shatya. She was Chip's mother before he erased his memories and became a human, partially having done so that he could forget her specifically, as he wanted a relationship with his mother, but she had not been willing to make the time for that. Kyo had thought the Repsauros were the ones most likely behind the Kyuserax attacks, and in the heat of the moment upon arriving, he made that very clear, only to have Dr. Shatya humble him by reminding him that, just like there are humans who do very good things and those who do very bad things, Repsauros are the same, and many of them are genuinely good. Phaestriel stepped in and took the blame for Kyo not having a more level-headed opinion about the Repsauros, as she's the one who told him about them, and all the tension was diminished enough for a conversation to be had with Dr. Shatya and Tarbus about who may really be behind the Kyuserax attacks. On top of being a brilliant Repsauro inventor, Shatya lives her life as a human who creates weapons and technology, like the Tekagami claws, for the Japanese military. She told Kyo and his allies that she suspects the Kyuserax were actually made by humans. Let's find out her justification for this in the next chapter of Starseed Psyche. Dr. Shatya's words lingered in the air. Humans making the Kyuserax? It both seemed impossible and yet felt way too possible after hearing it said out loud. Toshiko was the first to break the silence. You think it may be military officials trying to push weapons technology forward? Shatya nodded. That is likely a part of this if I am correct, but not simply weapons. In the process of innovating in one field, you will often discover revelations that benefit others as well. Discoveries made during the creation of the atom bomb resulted in massive leaps being made in the medical industry and in cancer treatment. When humanity gets desperate in times of war, bigger risks are approved to be taken and more discoveries are likely to be made. It was only after the last Kyuserax attack, in which many Super-8 soldiers were killed and injured, that we were given approval to start implementing field tests of the Tekagami claws. I had done some of my own, she said, nodding her head towards Tarbus, who is still leaning against the wall of the drab room, drumming his mechanical fingers. But I had not been able to see how the claw technology fares when used by natural-born humans in the field on a long-term basis. If these attacks are being orchestrated by humans, it would make sense that those humans would scale the level of the threat to force the hand of those in charge. If the Tekagami claw technology works, as I am frankly certain it will once any bugs are ironed out, it will revolutionize the medical field and earn billions for those with investments in it, such as Chief of Staff Shiji Kaburu. And yes, I will earn a very large sum from this as well, but I am already very well compensated by both humans and Repsauros. So don't think this is me pushing the war agenda to become rich, human, she snarled at me. I raised my hands. What? I get it, okay? You were right. I was being a lizard racist or whatever you want to call it. I'm cool, so can you back off me already? Yes, you no longer sound defensive at all, she muttered. How do you not get how hypocritical that is to say after you... I stopped myself mid-sentence, realizing I was getting riled up again, like the old me might have. Faye wouldn't react like this. I looked over at her and she just had a soft, gentle, supportive smile on her face, as if to say, it's okay. Even that got me kind of annoyed. The way I was narrating her in my head, it's like she was treating me like I was a child. Even though part of me knew that was just me inventing an idea of what she was thinking based on my own insecurities. That's the kind of thing that's easier for me to see now looking back than it was to see in the moment. I just leaned back in my seat and said, sorry, go on. The Chief of Staff is part of a global commission made up of other military leaders, world leaders, and a few random billionaires with too much time on their hands. This is not widely known, but is also not exactly a secret. They made up the majority of people who were allowed to meet with the Kyusidians, prior to them revealing their existence to humanity a few years ago. Their plans and conversations, however, are incredibly well-protected secrets. What I say next you cannot breathe a word of anywhere it may be heard by military officials. I only know this as Boru's most trusted inventor. He has mentioned on multiple occasions the Commission's interest in rapidly progressing our flight and space exploration technology. He has even hinted that this is something I should prepare for us to begin working further on next. I have some spacecraft technology in the works, but we have not had the funding to move forward with it as of yet. If my theory is correct, then presumably the next Kyuserax attack will be made from off-world, likely in the exosphere or farther out in space around the planet. This would force funding to be approved so that we could fight back more effectively. This seemed like the best lead we'd had, but then Toshiko cut in with a question that should have crossed my mind earlier. The significant gap in this theory is if the hypothetical humans orchestrating these attacks have technology as impressive as the Kyuserax themselves, why bother going through this whole process? The Kyuserax ships are already space-ready. The weapons the Kyuserax use are nearly as impressive as the Subarate gauntlets. Shotsia rapped her knuckle on the table twice, then pointed at Toshiko. That is the billion-dollar question. The Kyuserax technology could certainly not have been built by humans at this stage. While I have not been able to study it up close, it does appear to be very similar to Kyusidian technology, though that could simply be a deception. Spacecrafts of this caliber and technology that disintegrates upon ceasing its function is not particularly uncommon in more technologically advanced species, but humanity certainly has not reached this point yet, at least no humans I have come across. If they had reached this level, there would be no need to force a war. When Kyusidians returned to Earth this most recent time, they were attempting to share their technology with humanity, but even I was never able to replicate any of this. If Boru had permitted me to meet directly with Kyusidian inventors, I likely could have had better results. But the irksome commission was very picky about who actually got to meet with them. They showed me videos and relayed information the Kyusidians shared about their technology, but it largely came across as total nonsense to me. Relying on the soul's energetic field to power the blah blah blah, it was all useless. No offense, Kyusidian. Faye smiled. None taken. So if I understand correctly, for your theory about humans being behind the Kyuserax in order to progress humanity's technology to be correct, humans would have needed to gain access to the technology behind the Kyuserax, but not actually understand how to build it themselves. Therefore, they'd use the drones and technology to attack the Earth, then force human technology to progress in order to fight back. Shotsia nodded. Essentially, yes. But hey, that's just a theory. I could very well be incorrect. Ultimately, my job is not to discover the truth. It is to build the weapons that humanity fights back with. She then noticed Chip's face looking mildly disappointed with her, which, by the standards of how Chip usually looked, may as well have been him steaming from the ears and seething with rage. She continued, "But if there is anything I can do to help discover the truth, as I imagine you are all very inclined to do, you can contact me with more questions, and I can keep you updated on anything I learn myself." "I say we just let it keep going," Tarbus snarled. "It's the most interesting thing that's happened to humanity in decades." Chip chuckled slightly. "You trying to give off supervillain vibes there, bucko?" He grinned and licked his teeth. "Maybe. You gonna come at me if I am? I'll thump you like I used to in school, cheekavore." "School, huh? So you ain't my dad then? I was thinking that might have been the implication here." He stomped forward. "Snark it, I don't look anywhere near old enough to be your dad." Chip shrugged. I don't know what aging looks like for lizard people. Didn't mean to hurt your feelings there." He slammed a metal fist on the table. "Like you could hurt my feelings if you tried." "Down, Tarbus," Shotsia said, patting his metal hand. "We are trying to be positive representatives of our people here, remember? Now please, go ensure the platform is ready to return Chikavor and his friends to their previous location when we are finished." He growled. Yeah, sorry, Stasi. I'm on it." Faestriel stood up. "Excuse me, but would it be possible for me to accompany you? I do not mean to impose, but I would love to see more of Repsauro technology up close and in person. I came to Earth with a fascination for humans, but never expected to get an opportunity to see a Repsauro community for myself. Tarbis glanced at Shatya. She shrugged. Don't let anyone attack her. Tarbis rolled his eyes and nodded for Faye to follow. She leapt up excitedly. She grazed her hand along my back as she passed. I'll return soon. They left together, and we spent another 15 minutes or so talking with Dr. Shatya, bouncing different ideas and theories off her about the Kyuserax. It was mostly Toshiko doing the talking on our side. Some of the military tactics and terminology she was referencing went right over my head. It sounded like Toshiko had never been a big fan of Shijikaburu, and she wasn't at all surprised that he could be part of the problem. When their back and forth slowed to a stop, Chip finally spoke up. Hey, Kyo, Ms. Yamada, any chance y'all could give me a couple minutes alone with Dr. Shatya? I didn't know what he planned to say, but without hesitation I got up, nodding. Shatya seemed more concerned than Toshiko or I. The doctor led us into a room across the hall, similar to the one we'd just been chatting in, but a bit smaller, just to ensure we weren't left out in the open for every Repsauro in the base to see and potentially feel threatened by. I'd been thinking so much about what Chip was going to do that I hadn't even processed that I was alone with Toshiko. Not exactly how I expected my evening to go, she joked. I chuckled awkwardly. She sat on the desk in the room, fidgeting with the small Subaraith gauntlet we'd brought. Toshiko asked, You might know better than I do, but do Kyusidians have some kind of supernatural, being chill and relaxed all the time powers? Because Faye seems like you could chop her arm off and she'd forgive you before it even hit the floor. That time I gave a more genuine laugh. Yeah, right? It's like impressive in almost an annoying way. I feel like I acted like a total jerk compared to her through this whole thing. Toshiko shook her head. You responded perfectly understandably for how confusing and stressful of a situation it was. I think all of us looked bad compared to her. Maybe not Chip. He was surprisingly calm about this. Unless he snapped in there and is strangling Shatya right now. I shook my head. Honestly, knowing Chip, he's probably comforting her right now or something. My mind suddenly fell back on the moment where Toshiko had been crying after hearing Chip's heartbreaking final message to his mother before wiping his memories. I moved slowly over to her and leaned against the table beside her. Hey, are you okay? I mean, I know Chip's old self's final message thing was completely heartbreaking, but I don't know, I don't want to put thoughts in your head, but I know you have some issues with your mom. She sighed and drummed her fingers on the table for a moment before speaking. I don't know what to think about Ritsu. How invested am I supposed to be in my relationship with her? I mean, I don't remember my old parents as a Subarite, but I know I had some. I know I chose to be Ritsu's daughter, but was that just a means to an end? She is a really impressive person, but she can also be infuriating, especially now knowing that her whole always follow the authority above you mentality is forcing her to follow someone who may very well be behind the invaders we're fighting. I like the idea of having a better relationship with her, but how much effort is it really worth putting in when I have so many other things I want to do in this life? It's just confusing. I started thinking up tons of inspiring things I could say, but before I could let any out, they all just came across in my head as things I wanted to say to sound impressive and inspiring, not actually things that would help her. Instead, I said, well, I can give you comfort and sympathy, but if you need advice, Faye might be a better person to talk to about that, since she seems like she always knows the right thing to say. Toshiko turned and looked me in the eyes with a surprisingly grateful expression. I think I'd rather just have comfort from you anyway. My heart started thudding as I slowly reached an arm around her shoulder. I definitely hover-handed a second too long, but did finally get the nerve to set my arm down. As soon as I did, she relaxed even more than I realized she was capable of and lay her head against me. I realized her head was super close to my heart, and I knew she could feel it pounding, which obviously just made it pound even harder. A sound quietly rumbled in her throat, then came again, and I realized she was trying to conceal a laugh at my thudding heart. I groaned. I know, I'm trying to stop it. She burst out laughing. It's fine, I didn't think I'd make you that nervous. Well, yeah, it's not exactly every day that a brilliant, gorgeous starseed inventor willingly presses part of her body up against me. The second I said that, I felt my face going beet red. She raised her arm and pressed her hand gently onto my chest, right over my thumping heart. Speaking intentionally quietly and sweetly, she said, "Does this help?" I felt my breathing quicken and just laughed awkwardly again. Obviously not, that's so much worse. She laughed and pulled herself away. All right, sorry. Oh, I muttered. I didn't mean that I wanted you to stop. I saw excitement flash across her face as she said, "Okay, good." She leaned against me, putting her hand on my chest once more. My heart was still pounding at first, but I leaned my own head against hers and slowly the thudding reduced. Soon it was as if I could feel both our hearts beating in sync. I didn't know how long we stayed like that, but no length of time could have been enough. Eventually, still resting against me, Toshiko said, "I think we can both get to a point where we're as calm under pressure as Feastriel. Super-Wraith training has already helped us a lot in that field." I nodded gently, still leaning against her. "Yeah, I think so too. Not that today was a great example of where I'm at now, but if you knew me a year ago, there's no way that version of me would have been any good at comforting you, or been able to handle anything that happened today. You can change a lot in even just a year when you decide you have to." She leaned off me again and asked, "Speaking of a year ago, I read your file, when I suspected you were a starseed like me. I wanted to see if there was any more evidence of that. This will sound a bit arrogant if I'm wrong, but you said to my mother that you'd seen a Super-Wraith soldier in action during the first Kyuserax attacks. You also specified that she was absolutely incredible, if I'm remembering the documented conversation correctly." I smiled. "Yep, that's totally true. And on that note, do you by chance remember coming across some shabby-dressed guy with hair kinda like mine running for his life that you may have saved from getting blasted full of holes by a Kyuserax?" She gripped my leg surprisingly tightly. "That actually was you? You looked so different. I thought in the chaos I messed up and let a building fall on you." I chuckled. "Well, technically that did kinda happen, yeah, but I lived, and I've gone through a lot of changes since then. In fact, that night kind of changed my entire life." My heart was pounding again. I knew what I wanted to say next, but was it the right thing? I still didn't know if Toshiko was the love of my life or not, but I had spent the better part of a year thinking she was, and now that just felt so right. Because of that, I decided to just go for it. I said, "I finally started taking charge of my life after that. I used to be a really angry guy, and I guess there is still some of that in me, but I found Argent Angelo's book after that, met Chip, started getting in shape, and knew I wanted to join the Super-Wraith Squadron. And honestly, the whole time I was doing all that training, I hoped, once I became good enough, I'd get a chance to meet the incredible soldier who..." The door suddenly swung open, and I wanted to hurl a chair at the person who opened it, until I saw that it was Faye standing there. I think Toshiko must have given Faye an equally irritated look, because the smiling Cusidian said, "Oh, I'm sorry, would you like me to return later?" Neither of us answered, but I think we both wanted to say yes. Faye being the one to interrupt us at that exact moment got me worried. Was that some kind of sign? Was I not supposed to be into Toshiko? Was Faye really supposed to be the love of my life? A few seconds after Faye came in, the door across the hall opened. Dr. Shotsia stepped out of the room with tear-stained cheeks and puffy eyes. Chip came out behind her, and he looked perfectly fine. You'd never have guessed that he just learned that he was a lizard person with a childhood so depressing that he erased his memories to start a new life. He put a hand on her shoulder, and she gave him a big hug, and was clearly holding back more tears. Tarbus leaned against the wall next to Faye and snarled. Faye put a gentle hand on his shoulder, then quietly said, "Remember, Tarbus, her caring about him doesn't limit the feelings she may have for you." He took a breath and nodded. Right, got it, Faye." I never really got the whole story of what happened there, but it didn't surprise me to imagine Faye giving Tarbus some kind of therapy session in their brief chat together. Soon after that, we were all led back to the room and the metal platform where we'd first arrived. Repsauro teleportation isn't something they can just do constantly, but after a charging period, Shatya was able to send us back to Faye's ship, since it's where we'd been transported from. We thanked Shatya for her help and information, and after her chat with Chip, she more emphatically asserted her willingness to help us figure out the truth behind the Kyuserax. About 2 hours after being zapped away, we arrived back in Faye's ship. We were all blinded at first, as we had been before, but as our eyes were clearing, I asked, "Well, that was pretty wild. How are you feeling, Chip?" I wanted to ask what he'd said to Shatya, but didn't want to push him to talk about it if he didn't want to. Luckily, he was happy to elaborate. "I told her there was no need to feel bad. Like I said, I reckon that version of me we saw ain't really me. I mean, I believe it was, but I'm real different now. She couldn't control the fact that she didn't care about me, and now I've found people who genuinely do, without forcing it. And I reckon that old version of me wasn't really a fan of himself. I think the reason I was able to bring good folks into my life is because I got myself to a point where I like me. That means other people liking me is bonus and not a necessity. Funny enough, that kind of takes a lot of pressure off folks who might like you, and that makes them like you even more because they don't need to be nothing for you. They don't need to convince you that you're likable, because you already know you are." I was floored by his maturity. I couldn't really picture Chip chewing someone out, but it would have been totally understandable if he'd called Shatya out for not being a better mom. Instead, it sounded like he just helped her let go of the guilt she was harboring around the whole ordeal. Faye bounced on the ends of her hooves as she said, "That is a beautiful way to look at this experience, Chip and Saul, and having Dr. Shatya as an eager and willing ally could be hugely helpful to us. Your maturity may not have only helped stabilize some difficult emotions in yourself and Dr. Shatya, but may even help us save this world." Chip chuckled. "Well, that might be higher praise than I deserve, but I appreciate the compliment, Ms. Fayastriel." Faye and Chip were making eyes at each other, but he clearly thought about my little handshake situation and jerked his eyes away to look at me sort of apologetically. Was Chip into Faye? Part of me actually liked that idea, but what about Faye interrupting at the exact moment I was about to pour my heart out to Toshiko? Was that not a sign? It sure seemed like one. Faye gave us all hugs before sending us back down to the ground. As always, embracing her made all of my concerns in the world ever so briefly melt out of existence. Did that mean something? I didn't know what I was supposed to think, so I just tried to let it go and embrace the confusion. If I was supposed to understand what was going on, I tried to trust that I just would. The three of us transported back to the ground to head back towards the compound. We all needed to get some sleep before training the next day, and for our upcoming Kyuserax base invasion. That would hopefully provide an opportunity to look for more evidence of humans being behind the Kyuserax. When we were only a few paces into our walk, Toshiko looked down at her feet, surprisingly confused. "My boot is unlaced, give me a second." She knelt down and Chip shot his eyes over to me. A slight smirk crossed his face. You know what? In all the craziness, I sorta slipped on the fact that I gotta hit the loo pretty fierce. Mind if I run on ahead?" Toshiko tried to hide her eagerness as she said, "No problem, go ahead." Chip said goodnight, gave me a sly nod, then basically sprinted away from us. When he was out of earshot, Toshiko finished lacing and stood up. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel about Toshiko, but tried to just be there. I was genuinely excited to have time alone with her again. She chuckled, then said something that probably seemed like nothing to her, but struck me like a ton of bricks. With how Chip reacted to Dr. Shatya, he might make just as good of an emotional maturity rival for us as Fayastriel. I nearly burst out laughing in shock, confusion, and excitement all at once. I muttered, rival? She didn't know what that word meant to me and just shrugged. Well, maybe rival is too strong a word, but trying to keep up with Faye emotional maturity-wise is probably going to be a fun challenge and make us better people in the process. It felt like Toshiko had just snapped the final piece of a puzzle into place. An emotional maturity rival. That's exactly what Fayastriel was. Toshiko was clearly a bit confused by my slack-jawed response, but she couldn't hold back her question. What was it you were saying back in the room before we were interrupted? Something about your training and about me? I just laughed and grinned like a crazy person with my body practically shaking. If Faye was my rival, well, I knew exactly what else that meant. I said, right, I think You know what? I have a good way to summarize what I was saying. I stepped right up to her, wrapped one arm around her waist, and put the other firmly behind her head. I paused ever so briefly to see if she'd want to pull away or stop me. She didn't. In fact, before I was even ready to lean in farther, she wrapped herself around me, thrust her head forward, and pressed her lips firmly against mine. Time ceased to exist, as did the space around us, and every single sense I had, except for the feeling of her body embracing mine. Every part of my touch was elevated beyond anything I'd experienced. No pain or pleasure had ever made me feel anything this wholly and completely. Her hair through my fingers was soft and airy, like it was floating off into space beyond my grasp. Our arms melted into each other's backs. Her stomach and chest pressed against mine made me simultaneously relaxed and excited. I hadn't kissed many women before that moment, but even still, her lips convinced me that I'd never truly and genuinely kissed anyone else at all. It was as if my lips had been waiting for her before they would fully allow my nerves to experience what a kiss was really meant to feel like. I still didn't know who the love of my life was supposed to be, but I knew in that moment who I wanted it to be. Maybe that was all that really mattered. So that moment was originally going to happen a couple chapters from now, but once I got into the flow of writing this episode and just thinking about how heartbreaking the last episode was, I was just like, no, we're getting to this plot point now. And I think it's going to work out better this way anyway. Anyway, besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And today's message is kind of something that has really sunk in for me in the last couple weeks, which is, if you spend a lot of time worrying about whether other people think you're a good person, which is definitely something I used to do a lot, and even up until recently did a fair amount, what's most likely actually going on is subconsciously you're not convinced that you're a good person. Maybe consciously you think you are, but subconsciously that hasn't really set in. And when you get to a point where that does kind of click on a subconscious level that yes, you are a good person, which might only come after years of doing a lot of internal work on yourself, you start to become way less concerned about what other people think of you because you realize that they're viewing you through the lens of their own insecurities and their own worldviews, which don't necessarily line up with your own. So I guess the sort of advice here is to not spend so much time trying to convince other people that you're a good person. Just do your best to actually be what your idea of a good person is, and trust that people who resonate with you will see that eventually. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.